Before we begin, I'd like to start with a few brief thank yous. First, thank you to the Rwandan debate team, who we've gotten to know pretty well over pounds of fried chicken in the past couple of days. Honestly, they're a group of fun-loving, intelligent people, and I'm very glad that I now know them. Next, thank you to our coaches, Dr. Chris Harper, who's hiding in the back, Timothy Betts up here in the front, and of course, Dr. Hinderaker. Without all three of them, this debate simply would not be possible. Thank you to my partner, Sarah, for her quick wit and help in constructing this case. And finally, thank you to my parents, Privet, Mama and Papa, who will be watching this video later from home. They always support and believe in me, and I really hope they continue to do so after today. In May of 2017, comedian Kathy Griffin set the internet and the political spectrum ablaze when a controversial and violent photo surfaced of the comedian holding aloft the bloody head of a dummy made to look like President Donald J. Trump. Disturbing as that image was, what's more disturbing is the trend that it points to. Rather than attacking the president's policies or administration, Griffin attempted to weaponize outrage. She created a caricature that distorted reality and proliferated an image meant to incite violence. It's because these kinds of images are dangerous and harmful to our democracy when unregulated, because of the continued growth of fake news and the use of caricature, because of the importance of maintaining truth and integrity in reporting, that Sarah and I are proud to stand in affirmation of today's resolution. Resolved, this House believes democracy demands character assessment, not caricature assassination. First, I'd like to start off with some definitions. We'd like to define democracy as a system of government by the people or all eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives. Caricature assessment will be defined as the critical analysis of the validity of information. Caricature will be defined as characteristics exaggerated in order to create a comic or grotesque effect, and caricature assassination will be political intent to defame through caricature. At the end of today's round, you should hold the value of factual truth to the highest. Whoever upholds this value is the side that should win today's debate. With that, Sarah and I have three main reasons as to why you should vote in favor of the affirmative today. First, caricature has an inherently inflammatory intent. Essentially, caricature is a straw man fallacy that's meant to distort reality and our perception of reality. By exaggerating, misrepresenting, or simply fabricating someone's argument, as caricaturization does, we undermine honest and rational debate. A perfect example of this and many other problems in our society is Donald when decided to portray Donald J. Trump on Saturday Night Live. What he didn't expect, however, is that the president would respond in a slew of angry tweets. The New York Times of March 2nd, 2018 reports that after Alec Baldwin played Donald Trump on SNL, Trump responded with insults the world had never seen before. However, rather than the media being focused on issues like Kim Jong-un and North Korea potentially bombing us, Vladimir Putin, or the pending heat death of the universe, they focused on Alec Baldwin and Donald J. Trump. We distorted reality to the point where issues that are pertinent in the status quo, issues that could literally lead to the demise of democracy, were less important than Alec Baldwin. Next, however, caricature reinforces stereotypes. We recently saw this in action with a caricature published of Serena Williams that was grotesque and racist. On September 16th of 2018, Serena Williams was caricaturized at the US Open. Her humanity was stripped from her to accentuate her blackness being synonymous with anger, and this was published in a newspaper because nobody censored it out of the public. This is disturbing. This reinforces stereotypes, and this is the reason we continue to have racial divides in our country. It's simply unacceptable, however, it continues to happen because of caricature assassination. Next, caricature damages democracy. First, we'd love to look at some communication theory, as we always do. First, agenda setting. Essentially, the media is incredibly powerful in showing us what they want us to see. Political scientist Bernard Cohen in 1963 observed that the press may not be successful much of the time in telling people what to think, but it is stunningly successful in telling people what to think about. In the past 2 weeks, we saw this in action. Brett Kavanaugh was the face of the news cycle in the past 2 weeks in the United States. However, if you watch Fox News, you saw a very different image of Brett Kavanaugh than you would on CNN. It's this distortion of reality that damages democracy. We no longer have access to facts because everything is skewed in a specific ideological bend. This is disturbing, however, it continues to be the reality for our country. Next, fake news has gone mainstream. Renee DiResta, the director of research at New Knowledge, explains that the power to influence opinion increasingly lies with those who can most widely and effectively disseminate a message. If you can make it trend, you can make it true. Facebook in May of 2018 deleted 583 million fake accounts, some of which were publishing news. Fake news has gone mainstream and continues to damage democracy in the United States of America. Next, however, we're breeding distrust and political division. We've romanticized a love affair between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. We've called Kim Jong-un Little Rocket Man. All of this makes us numb to the reality of situations and distorts our perception of reality. Instead of paying attention to the status quo and the nitty-gritty of different facts, we've romanticized and numbed ourselves to reality. Finally, character assessment is vital to stabilizing democracy. Please know that Sarah and I are not advocating for an end to free speech. What we want is true speech. First, the news media needs to be more proactive and less retractive. The New York Times of September 6, 2018 reports that Twitter, thank God, permanently suspended conspiracy theorist Alec Jones and his InfoWars outlet for abusive behavior. I'll take your first of two.
Who decides what true speech is?
Truth speech can be decided by looking at the facts. This requires some research. You have to be proactive. You have to look at various different sources and outlets. There's no one truth. There's many truths, however, we can narrow it down to something that's not absurd as Alice Jones. Next, however, character assessment must precede personal assessment. Edward R. Murrow, a pioneer of radio and television in the 1950s, is credited as being the leader of the downfall for McCarthyism. Because of his fair, factual, and honest reporting, he didn't show any bias and thus led to the downfall of McCarthyism. It's this focus, not on ad hominem attacks, but rather on critical analysis. It's being a critical analyst and a truth seeker that leads people to truly discover the truth in the status quo in the United States. I'd like to leave us with a quote from Bob Schieffer. "We attack the people, not the policy, and that is at the heart of the fall of democracy." We need to uphold democracy, and right now, democracy demands that we better assess what goes out into the media, what caricatures are published, and what the public is consuming. Once again, I'd like to thank you all for being here today. Thank you to my partner, thank you my opponents, and I cede the rest of my time.
Good evening, dear ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Oh, okay. Sounds like a thing. So before I proceed, I would like to say that I'm very excited to be here, and I would like to thank everyone who made it possible for us. So thank you for having us. It's such an honor to have such a big crowd over here to cheer for us. Thanks for our debaters. Thank you to the TCU debate speech, and thank you for all of you who made it possible for us to be here. Now, today's motion states that this House believes that democracy demands character assessment, not caricature assassination. But before I engage you to the debate, we as the negative would like to define some of the key terms that we think are important to this debate. Now, let's define democracy, right? We're just going to go with the basic definition of democracy, which is a government of the people, by the people, as the affirmative suggested. Now, democracy is a form of government where the legitimacy of the government comes from the people. Although the definition of democracy needs to differ, but when one studies the different democracies, they all at least have three of these foundations. So democracy, the first foundation of democracy is the individual rights and civic participation. The second is the separation of powers, which is the executive, legislative, and the judicial powers. And the third one is the rule of law, which basically states that nobody, even leaders, and no one is above the law. However, and then caricature assassination. So now the affirmative side today defined caricature assassination as a political intent to define political leaders. But again, we think this is just unfair, and we think this is just a minor part of caricature assassination. Therefore, we believe that caricature assassination is basically the use of political cartoons to make fun or to mock our leaders. on to my first argument. Now, today the main question of this debate, and the question that you should all ask yourself is, which team provides better benefits for democracy? Is it the character assessment or the caricature assassination? Now, before I give on my positive arguments, I would just like to begin by giving you all the disadvantages of character assessment and the reasons as to why we are standing here today advocating for caricature assassination instead. Now, the first argument that we're going to make is that the first argument is that character assessment is based on a flawed assumption about human beings. Now, the affirmative would like to make us believe that people make rational decisions when they have all the facts, as they said. But numerous studies have showed us that the idea that human beings make decisions based on the truth is flawed. So we are influenced by numerous things before we make decisions, such as, the appearance of candidates, the emotions that they evoke to us, and sometimes we are moved by peer pressure. Now, come on. We don't want the truth, right? We do not want the truth. We just want something that makes us justify what we hold on to be the truth, right? No amount of studies will convince a Californian that Whataburger is better than In-N-Out, right? Therefore, no Californian will believe that Whataburger is better than In-N-Out simply because that's what they believe, no matter the amount of studies that you provide to them. Now, the second argument is that the political polarization in the United States at this point is so bad that no character assessment would ever change our voting. Now, before 2016, the current president of the United States, who's Donald Trump, was accused for sexual assault by a number of women, and his opponent, Clinton, was accused of corruption and mismanagement of the office. But despite the number of accusations, people still voted the same way they would have voted. This would mean that they either did not get the correct information or that their political affiliations were so strong that no amount of truth and no amount of accusation was able to make them change. But anyways, I'll go with the latter, which is they had so strong affiliations, that no amount of truth could make them change. Now, no amount could make them change. Now, the third argument that I would like to make is that character assessment is just an impossible task in democracy. In a perfect world, which is not the world we're in, we would be able to find the truth, right? We'd be able to find the truth because, again, it's a perfect world. But in this world we live in, it's impossible to make a judgment of a character. Now, the question becomes, who decides what the criteria for this assessment is? Who does the assessment? And who gives the authority to whoever does the assessment to do so, right? Now, without a clear understanding of who carries out this assessment, we will find ourselves with a void that will be filled by the elite political establishments, and they will use this as a way to manipulate people. If no one is able to define what character assessment is, then we're giving the power to the authority to define what character assessment is, and then they will basically define character assessment as something that portrays them as the good one, which basically means that it's simply impossible, because then that's not democracy. If a leader is able to stand up and define what character assessment is, it's not democracy, because now that becomes dictatorship, which is not what we're advocating for tonight. Now, the last disadvantage of character assessment that we'll talk about tonight is that character assessment simply silences people. Like I said in my last argument, right, because we do not have a clear standard of what constitutes a character assessment, people will default to the values that the majority abides to, right? Throughout history, we have seen ways in which mainstream societies have shut down anyone with different views. And this is a point that my partner, Mecca, will extend further on. So now, at this particular moment, I would just simply like to outline some of the few reasons as to why we believe caricature assassination better brings democracy than character assessment. Now, the first reason is that caricature assassination best illustrates freedom of speech and freedom of space. A famous leader once said, "I give you freedom of speech, but freedom of speech, that I cannot guarantee after you've said what you wanted to say." Although this quote might sound funny, but it represents the sad reality of living under a society with no freedom of speech. Caricature assassination allows us to make fun of our leaders without the fear of retribution. In every society, we could have character assessment. Even in a dictatorship, we do have character assessment. But then caricature assassination is unique to democracy, because then this is a voice of people, and then people are able to portray what they think about leaders, which could not happen in a dictatorship. So during the Arab Spring, political cartoonists were jailed and killed, and this is the case for all over the world, for anyone who decided to stand up and advocate for what was not right. The second argument and the second reason as to why we believe caricature assassination is the best way is that caricature assassination, to be honest, is more accessible to people, right? A picture speaks 1,000 words, someone said. Now, caricature assassinations are more understandable to the common man which makes it easy for them not to be left out of the process. As we say, democracy is a government of the people, by the people. Caricature assassination are basically cartoons which are accessible to people, and in this sense, people can take part in governance, and then they can serve their first right. And the third point, and the third reason as to why we believe caricature assassination is better, is because caricature assassination provokes a dialogue that would not happen otherwise. Now, let's face it, even though most cartoons are exaggerated, right, but they have a layer of truth in them. Most cartoonists use this as a form of art to provoke majority's consciousness and to expose contradictions. For example, in France, Charlie Hebdo supporter claimed that the newspaper exposed the contradiction in the Muslim faith where it claimed to be a religion of peace until someone attacked their prophet, and this was the same for the Catholic Church. Although these cartoons are sometimes exaggerated, but they bring out a truth that nobody wants to know and nobody wants to reveal. Therefore, it's a better way to achieve democracy. And lastly, we would honestly like to say that the best way to assess the character of a leader is to make fun of him, to mock him, just to see how he's going to react. Thank you.
Okay, I, of course, will begin with the thank yous. Thank you to everyone. Rich, hello, nice to see you here. It's been a long time. Thank you to my family. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Thank you, of course, to my coaches and to the Rwandan debaters. It's been such an experience and an incredible blessing to have gotten to know you over the past couple of days, and I'm excited to have this clash with you today about something that's incredibly pertinent. With that, let's hop right into the debate. Today, the opposition gets up here and gives you a lot of good reasons as to why caricature is vital in society. And the government team will tell you that yes, caricature is in fact vital to society. That the government today is not advocating for any sort of anti-free speech. We are not trying to suppress free speech. We are not trying to suppress freedom of the press. But rather, we are advocating that our freedom of the press is at threat currently in the status quo, because of caricature assassination, because the caricature has been exaggerated to such a force that truth is distorted in our reality. And we're going to get into that with some of the definitional things that they bring up. The negative offers an alternative definition of democracy, which essentially is a much prettier version of ours, so we'll concede to that. And they would like to contest that caricature assassination is political cartoons to mock leaders. I think you'll see that our initial definition is pretty much in line with this, and that political intent to defame political leaders through caricature. So there's really no debate on the definitions today. That being said, the negative presents a lot of beautiful arguments as to why character assessment is flawed. In their first argument, they say that character assessment is based in flaws because humans are not rational beings. As an economics major, I will agree with that wholeheartedly and tell you that humans are anything but rational beings. We make a lot of decisions that we don't expect ourselves to make. However, that does not mean that we cannot strive for accurate character assessment in the status quo. It does not mean that we cannot strive for character assessment to provide the best democracy that we possibly can for our nation. Next, they talk that political polarization is so bad that no character assessment is currently happening. I'll get you at the end of this point. They say that no character assessment is possible, and they cite how President Donald J. Trump currently sits in our office, how previously we knew perhaps this is a man who does not have the best character. However, if we're having questions of what is character, how can we define and place this idea of character upon Donald Trump? Moreover, though, there are alternate causes when we look to why Donald J. Trump is in office. And first, we have to look to the idea that not everybody hates Donald J. Trump. Second, the fact that there are things like structural racism, structural inequality, and white supremacy and the rise of nationalism that led to this. It is not specifically because of this lack of character assessment, but rather the lack of character assessment on part of the people, and that is due to the incessant character assassination proliferated by our media. Next, they talk how character assessment is impossible in a democracy because who does the assessment? And that's valid, but again, I would like to present to the argument that we have to try, and who is responsible? Well, that is our news media, because ultimately, where do we get our information? How would we know what's going on in the Middle East, or in China, or in Russia, or with Little Rocket Man, If we did not have the news media, these are the people that the government is holding responsible today for assigning who is a valid character and assessing character of our political figures. Next, they talk about a lot of reasons why caricatures can be bad, essentially how they can harm freedom of speech. And again, the government today is not advocating in any way for anti-free speech. We believe we have to have free speech. However, we believe that that free speech needs to be based in truth. And truth, while hard to define, we're defining today in the terms of character assessment as factual truth. First, looking at our political figures and our people that lead our country based on the facts of their life, where they went to school, who they're married to, the kind of person they are, as opposed to putting our opinions upon them. I'll get you first, too.
Who are you protecting?
Who am I protecting?
Yep.
Could you elaborate on that?
Who are you protecting by saying that character assessment is better?
Democracy. They say that freedom of speech is hindered when we try to scale back on the character assassination, but that is not what the government is advocating for today. We're saying that this caricature assassination is such out of hand in the status quo that democracy is inherently threatened, that democracy demands character assessment and not caricature assassination. They say that caricature is easy for the people to access, and that is true. Caricature and satire is a vital part of our society, and we are not saying that this needs to go away. Satire and caricature are very viable ways of critiquing the government and the status quo in which we live. However, in the status quo, we see that that is not what's happening. And to transition into our arguments and extend our arguments further on the government, I would like to read to you a quotation from Molly Ivins, who is a Texas journalist known for satire. Ms. Ivins states that satire is traditionally the weapon of the powerless against the powerful. When satire is aimed at the powerless, it is not only cruel, it is vulgar. And that is the point the government is making today. The negative wants you to believe that caricature is a vital weapon for the powerless, and we agree with that. However, right now, that is not the person who is weaponizing caricature. The people who are weaponizing caricature are the people who are influencing most our beliefs and our values in this society. And that is why it is a threat to democracy. And that is why democracy demands character assessment. So to extend some of the arguments that we brought up today as the government, first, looking to our first point, that caricature has an inherently inflammatory intent. I would like to, again, bring up some communication theory of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Any comm major in this room, that is the first thing you learn in a comm class and the thing you'll take to the grave with you. Sapir-Whorf states essentially that language shapes our reality. However, when that language is turned into caricature that is meant to grotesquely make fun of our political figures, when that language is harmful, when that language is filled with opinions and not necessarily factual truth, our reality is distorted. We talk a lot about fallacies and how these caricatures and the assassination, essentially the extent to which we are using caricature, is rooted in fallacies like ad hominem attacks, the red herring, and the straw man. Essentially, we see the polarization that the negative brings up today in our society, where the right and the left or someone in between are pointing fingers at each other without ever really making any actual arguments. We're distracting from the actual causes and problems in our society in doing so. And that is why the incessant caricature assassination taking place in this nation and in our democracies is absolutely should not be prioritized over character assessment. Moving on, we talk about how this is inherently damaging our democracy. Essentially, we talk a lot about news media and how they shape our perceptions. We talk about agenda setting. Essentially, I spoke earlier on how we don't know what's going on the other side of the world without our news media. We rely on them because they don't tell us what to think necessarily, but they do tell us what to think about, and that is incredibly powerful. We have to understand that with the internet and the news media in these days, we are seeing an unprecedented landscape where lies and flat-out mistruths can more easily permeate our society through character assassination. And lastly, on our last point, that character assessment is vital to stabilize democracy. It's our news media, ultimately, as they will not want me to say, that is responsible for deciding what is factual truth and what is character assessment. At the end of the day, as it is now, caricature is elevated to the point of assassination, and it does not create a climate which promotes public welfare, but rather it promotes public fear. As it is now, caricature is not purposeful in producing social or political change as the negative wants to believe that it was meant to be. Rather, it is preventing those types of change. As it is now, caricature serves only to defame, demoralize, and dehumanize its subjects. As it is now, democracy demands character assessment and not caricature assassination.
Thank you very much. I feel honored and privileged to be here today. The last time I had people like this, it was in my sister's wedding, and now I'm happy that I can remember the memories. Now, when my prime minister started, we said that at least we are debating about a point that at the end of the day, you're leaving this room with the same opinion that you came in with, because we're not going to change your position. But at least we need to analyze the two facts. Which of the two, character assassination and character assessment and caricature assassination, which one provides or which one gives a boost to democracy that we need? My prime minister, my deputy leader of the opposition tried to explain at least three main things that we need to have for a democracy to function or for a nation to qualify as a democratic nation. We say that we need even individual rights, and again, we need participation of the population, fully participation of the population. Now, the opposition today, the proposition today suggested that the only reason as to why we are trying to ban or stop caricature assassination, it's because we want to stop fake news. But how can you call it fake news if you do not allow people to share ideas of how they feel about the news? How can you qualify something to be fake news if you stop some people to show deeply how they feel about something? Because what the affirmative is trying to do today is to make us feel like we should have at least one line of how we believe that news should be. We should have one line of how good news should be or how correct news should be, without allowing people to truly prove to them that at least I feel this about Donald Trump. They say that Donald Trump has been mocked. Donald Trump replied to tweets in a bad manner. But now the question is, if we were to assess the character of Donald Trump today, the majority will say that Donald Trump doesn't fit to be the president, but now he's the president. Why do we have that? It's mainly because, with the first point that we mentioned, it's mainly because that we are so divided politically that no character assessment can allow people to change the position. We are so attached to our political affiliation that it is so hard to bring any kind of character assessment that allows me to change my personal perspective about what I hold to be the truth. I'll come back to you. I want to explain. Now, I asked them a question. Who are we protecting by banning, by stopping, or by saying that caricature assassination is not the right thing? Who are they protecting? They didn't mention exactly who they are protecting, but if we are trying to analyze each and every argument they brought forward, they are protecting the leaders, the people in the power. That's the definition they provided. But let's ask us a question. Is that all that democracy requires? Democracy is not about the leaders. Democracy requires leaders, but with the people again. So if you protect the leaders from the thoughts or the beliefs and the anger and the fear and every feeling of the people, then you're not building a strong democracy. What you're trying to do, you're trying to build actually a strong dictatorship in line with protecting them from the reality that the people have. Now, they try to say that we must be having, we should be having free speech, freedom of speech, but that is full of truth. The question still is, who defines what the truth is? Who defines or who gives a clear definition of what should stand in the population or in the people as the truth? Because up to today, she mentioned it. When we were in California, we were told that the best burger was In-N-Out. When we came to Texas, we were told that the best burger is Whataburger. But now the question is, The question is, if you go in California and tell people you're not allowed to assassinate the water bugger, they're not going to believe you. And if you come with the same idea in Texas, they're not going to believe you. Now, what needs to be done is let people speak out what they want in every way that they want. But let's look at step ahead. Do we just let people speak out that?
Speak a lot about the polarization in our current democracy. If anything, what would you attribute to that polarization?
What?
If you're not attributing caricature assassination to the polarization in our society, what does it stem from?
All right, the thing in this debate we should understand is, let's not take our leaders to be angels, right? Donald Trump receives abuses, I don't deny that, but he also abuses people, which means it's a failure in his character. Now the question is, why do we only look at something that is only going to protect Donald Trump from the same thing as he does as the president of the nation? I do not deny that what he receives sometimes is so bad and too harsh. Even myself, I'm like, wow, this is harsh to understand. But again, sometimes he tweets things and I'm like, why would the president do this? But why now should we look at a side that only protects Donald Trump as the president? Now, the other thing that I want to say is they do not prove the uniqueness of their argument. They say that we have too much fake news in the world full of caricature assassination. But the question is, even if we are to say that we do not need this in our democracy, are we truly sure that we are going to have all news to be correct? If people don't just say that they are not Fox News, CNN, they don't assassinate any character, but if you're to analyze the news they give you, is it all true? Because there is no policy that we can put in place that is going to stop fake news. You will come at school, a student is going to give you news they had on the radio or on TV the other day in a fake way, and you're going to believe it. How do we stop that? Should we send those students out of school? No, we should look at something that really makes people involved too much in the democracy, not something that is going to hold some ideas out of the democratic way. Now, the other thing, the main burden of the debate was to prove that we need a system, or we need to agree with one thing. What is that thing that is going to allow full involvement of the people? Now, no matter how I disagree with you, I still have to protect your right to say something the way you want it, the way you feel about it, the way you wish to say it, because that is the real definition of freedom of speech. If freedom of speech is defined and you include a word, however, that is not freedom of speech. That is speech that is protected. It's not freedom of speech. Now, the affirmative today, what they had to prove to us is, how can you say that we are going to protect freedom of speech, but however, we need speech that is only true? How is that freedom of speech if it is not? If it is still protected? Now, to try to bring my last thing to you, the audience. Today, I want you to think about a world whereby you're allowed to say everything the way you feel it. But again, you're provided with how you can live in a society where you don't keep the anger in you. Because in Rwanda, what happened in 1994, people kept things in their heart and they did not say it out, and what resulted was the genocide. So if you keep your anger inside you, if you're given any opportunity to just do something as violence, you're likely to do it. But if your anger is let out and you have opportunities of great debaters like the debaters of TCU to challenge you the way you think, then there we can have a perfect world. Though we can never have a perfect world, but at least we can have a world that is fair. Thank you very much.
Ready? Everybody ready? Okay. So once again, I'm happy to be back here, and I'm just going to give a rebuttal speech, which is basically going to be what we said versus what they said and why we believe you should vote for our side. Now, the first thing that the affirmative say today is that caricature assassination exaggerates and undermines the truth. Yes, it does exaggerate some things, but the truth is caricature assassination says the truth that nobody wants to say. which is basically where we advocate for it. In a democracy, we believe everyone has the right to say what they want and what they feel, especially if the government should be governed by the people. So then caricature assassination, even though it exaggerates, it still has the power to let out the truth that nobody wants to say, and we believe that's a fundamental thing for democracy to happen. And then they also talk about how the truth is based on facts, right? But then the question still becomes, who decides what the truth is, and who decides what the right facts are? They say the media. They say that the media is responsible for assessing characters, and that the media, has the right to give out facts. But then, how do we make sure that the media is not biased? How do we make sure that the media is not protected by the leaders? How do we make sure that the media is not, influenced by the leaders? How do we make sure that the media is actually run by people, which is the whole point of democracy? And again, my speaker asked them, what is the uniqueness about character assessment that you cannot find, in a dictatorship? Because then we have assessed characters. I talked about how there were people who came out when Trump was running for presidential, and they came out saying that he, all of these things about him, but that did not change the mind of people. They still voted for him, despite the fact that they know he had a trashy character. They still voted for him. So the point is that human beings are not rational. They do things based on what they believe to be true, no matter how much evidence and studies you bring across. So then now we want you to put on a balance, right? Look at a world where leaders are the ones who are in charge to decide what is true. That is simply not democracy. It's just that leaders want to portray it as democracy, but it's simply not democracy. We have advocated for caricature assassination because we believe that caricature assassination involves the people, which is a right. So therefore, we invite you to come to our side. Thank you.
I'd like to preface this by saying Whataburger is the better burger. On January 7th of 2015, 12 people were killed in the offices of Charlie Hebdo by two heavily armed men angered by the French magazine's use of the image of the Prophet Muhammad in political caricatures. During the 2008 presidential campaign, The New Yorker depicted Barack Obama in Islamic garb and Michelle Obama with an afro and an AK-47 slung over her shoulder. The couple were doing a fist bump in the Oval Office while a portrait of Osama bin Laden looked on and the US flag burned in the fireplace. In World Wars I and II, there was a 15% shooting rate amongst men. Even with fate at stake, soldiers could not bring themselves to shoot. During the Vietnam War, however, the enemy were referred to as roaches and characterized as silhouettes and non-human, disposable life. The shooting rate amongst Western men went up to 85%. Caricature has a long history of mocking the weak, reinforcing bias, and encouraging cruel and childish ridicule towards individuals and groups perceived as different. Sarah and I support free speech. However, in the status quo, in order for democracy to flourish in the United States and in our global community, we need to ensure that free speech is true speech, because we've all too well seen the repercussions of fake news and untrue speech and caricatures which have perpetuated throughout our society. I'd like to give you some reasons as to why you should feel comfortable voting for the affirmative at the end of today's round. First, go Frogs. Second, what is the truth? There is no capital T truth because we live in a society where people have different opinions and different biases. We agree to that wholeheartedly. However, Alex Jones and InfoWars is not the truth. Propaganda is not the truth. Violence, racism, and hate speech are not the truth. These are forms of communication that do nothing to better society. They do nothing to uphold democracy, and in fact, they point out the worst flaws in our society. Next, however, free speech. I come from a family of ex-Soviets, so I value free speech more than most people in this audience. However, we cannot have free speech if we are dying for caricatures. If we are willing to put our lives on the line to protect cartoons which distort reality and perpetuate propaganda, then we don't have free speech in this country. The negative doesn't seem to agree with that, however. Next, democracy is falling right in front of us, and we're letting it perish and burn by continuing to perpetuate and propagate fake news. When we can't trust the media in the status quo, democracy falls because people get radical ideas, radical notions, continue to perpetuate this kind of banter against our politicians, our countries, and our adversaries. This is not good for democracy. This is not good for the United States of America, and democracy demands that we do a hell of a lot better. Finally, what is character assessment? The negative has come up here and said that we want to make a dictatorship, that we want people controlling every aspect of our media. However, that's not at all what we want. We prefaced our first speech, and Sarah brought up the point that we support free speech more than ever because it's more pertinent than ever right now in America. However, what's also pertinent is that our truth is factual and not opinionated. What's pertinent is to ensure that we are doing the work before this news is published, to ensure that it is truthful, and to ensure that when people consume these various kinds of news, they're consuming the truth and not something that's opinionated and distorted and perpetuating a vision of our country, our society, and our world that doesn't exist. In 2018, September of this year, Nike published an ad featuring Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick was previously demonized as being un-American for taking a knee during football game national anthems. However, the most American thing we can do is peacefully protest something that we believe in. However, caricature demonized Colin Kaepernick. Nike took a step towards becoming truth seekers. They focused on the person and not the caricature. The media must become more proactive and less retractive. As we continue to get further and further from any semblance of truth in our media, we face a very scary reality. We've deluded ourselves to the point where ad hominem, ad absurdum, and caricature are the norm. This can no longer be our reality because democracy demands better. Thank you.